welcome to Leadership Today. I'm Emmanuel Sam, your host, and welcome to the broadcast in the last weekend of July 2020. The leadership dimensions of the world system have been characterized by mass exploitation, degradation of human lives, degradation of values, inability to help individuals, families, corporate organizations, societies, and nations to be able to attain to the fullness of their potential. Even though, they are interpreted under the guise of servant leadership, a clear picture of the world today reveals that, there have been a lot of deception, a lot of clandestine operations going on, as is evidenced, all around the world today, with the United States of America, China, and a couple of other Arab nations being a case study. And so, right now we are at a very strategic time when God is calling for leaders after a different sort. Currently, there is a lot of confusion. Several people are confused. A couple of other people are no longer interested in the fulfillment of vision. People are so discouraged. People are disillusioned. People have decided to give up on life. As a matter of fact, this is what the enemy of our souls desires that this is the place he desires that we get to, a place where we no longer have the moral courage and fortitude to be able to stand tenaciously towards the fulfillment of our individual and our corporate destinies. But what is heaven saying? Right now, there is a summon. Matter of fact, when you see what's going on in the United States and the rest of the world, a lot of conspiracies being dug up, a lot of revelations about the deceptiveness and the deceptions of the leaders, past leaders of several nations and even current leaders, you begin to understand that we are in a season of intense judgment. And in 2016, when President Donald Trump assumed office, he was about 70 years old. Now 70, according to scripture, signifies a season of ordination of judges, a number of justice or judgment, and also a season of ordination of elders who were to partner with God for the establishment of judgment in the earth. Moses, Numbers 11:16 talks about the fact that Moses took about 70 elders up to the mountain of God alongside Aaron and they had a meal with God, and they were ordained from that point on to establish judgment. Now this is strategic because President Donald Trump was about 70 years old when he assumed power, and that was God speaking to the nations as a warning that he has come to reclaim the desolate heritages in the nations. Right now, God is working at individual and structural levels, and he expects us kingdom citizens to be able to catch up by standing in his counsel. The prophet Jeremiah talks about the fact that if we had stood in his counsel, we would have been able to hear his voice to know what he is doing. And so, as a result of this, in the midst of the upheavals, in the midst of the shakings, people are more survival oriented rather than leadership oriented. But in the kingdom, this is a very strategic season where pioneers of kingdom dimensions for these last days before the return of the king, this is when those kind of pioneers are being raised. Many have been in the crucible of the fire of the Spirit for the past decade. Several are still ongoing, but God is beginning to unlock this out. And so we must begin to understand how to be able to partake of the fullness of the dimensions of wisdom for the establishment of justice, so that we can reclaim the desolate heritages and build with precision in line with the will of God before the return of the King. All right. Having said this now, let us move on to the rules of engagement. The first rule for engagement, to be able to be God's kind of leader in this season, is that we must be burden bearers, individually, corporately, nationally. Right now, the covenant blessing on Abraham is being reactivated over the nations. Remember, God told Abraham, "In you shall all the nations of the earth be blessed." In other words, there are patterns and dimensions that we have to study from the life of Abraham to be able to understand what the required components, the required qualities that are necessary for the establishment of godly leaders over nations. And so the first thing we'll talk about is the aspect that has to do with burden bearing by the spirit of fatherhood. Right now, this is an old principle, it's not new, but right now, God is emphasizing that by laying burdens, books of heaven are being opened, books over territories, books over organizations, books over nations are being unlocked, unleashed right now from heaven for people to be able to have blueprints for the establishment of the will of God with precision. But the leaders of God, first of all, must become burden bearers. In the place of burden bearing, God begins to release the wisdom required for reclamation of territories, spheres, and nations. People must love what God loves and must desire what God desires above their own personal desires. This is the first criteria for leadership in the kingdom. For leadership that is going to be entrusted with custodianship of that which God is doing in the earth, the wisdom for that which God is doing in the earth right now. Now, the second component or the second quality is the spirit of fatherhood. There has to be people who are willing to lay down their lives that the rest of mankind and the next generation will come into the fullness of God's plans, purpose, and promises. We must go beyond survival orientations. We must begin to bear burdens. And this applies to individuals, whether at local, family levels, up till national governmental levels. This is important. God is raising burden bearers. The burden bearers are the ones who are going to be able to bear the will of God. So let's talk about the structural dimensions. There is a wisdom God is releasing for structures over nations. By structures, I mean systems, organizations, governments. There has to be burden bearers who come as a corporate body to stand to ensure that their organizations can, fulfill the will of God at the corporate level. And so a major strategy that God is releasing right now is that He's raising people, in several professions, maybe colleagues in the office, depending on the strategy and the sphere to be engaged. And He's bringing people together who are professionals to be able to download the books of their spheres because they are standing in the counsel of the Lord. Strategic, specific instructions that are going to require that these people lay down their lives, lay down their differences, lay down their positions and their professional status, and come together for the corporate good. This is the only way they can be able to house to receive the wisdom that's been released for the spheres and the structures. Now, what are the components of this wisdom after they've been received? Number one is strategy for engagement towards profiting. Number two is defense mechanisms to ensure it against casualties to the barest minimum. Number three is favor in the sight of governments when we're talking about internationally, and then external governments and external corporate global entities when we're talking about internationally. And so this is the wisdom that God is releasing for the establishment of structural systems, and spheres. And it's important that the same principle of burden bearing, the people must be of one heart and one soul, and they must avoid conflicting notions as much as possible. We must lay down, differences as has to do with individualistic differences, and rather focus on the ideals that will make for the corporate good at governmental levels, corporate levels. Now, this applies to every organization. These are basic principles. This must be a servant leadership orientation, where as leaders we translate in perspective and understanding into becoming fathers that can give a covering to subordinates, thereby creating room for expression with the rights to conscience, justice, and faith. George Washington, the founding president of the United States of America, is reputed to be a man of deep devotion to God, and a man driven by the need for justice, self-expression, and liberty. That's the principle. Our corporate policies at structural levels, corporate policies, orientations for engagement must be justice and liberty oriented, without any subtle spirit of oppression, without any need to control people beyond that which the conscience allows for. This has been the major issue with leadership in the spheres. There's been more of control rather than upliftment of people's spirits, so that people can come into a full manifestation, and then we can engage to be able to maximize corporate efforts by the principle of synergy. And so we must get back to this, and we must understand that where there is no liberty to express oneself, creativity is stifled, and where creativity is stifled, there can be no maximization of potential for the establishment of, for the establishment of that for which was the original intent and purpose of corporate organizations in the first place. We must come to that place where we are able to come with a posture of service for the corporate good, and then maximization of self, and then profit for the corporate good. There must be a switch in orientations as it has to do with our structures and systems. Now, this may not look as simple as it seems, but when we begin to bear the burden corporately for organizations, the wisdom will be released, because the king has gone ahead. And right now, he's summoning people to come into places where they can begin to receive strategic blueprints with resources for the birthing and the establishment of the will of God on earth. And so I'd like us, I like us viewers to take our time to see how we can stay in the place of watching corporately. There are ideas that are not going to be able to come to individuals in organizations, especially at management levels. But those ideas are only going to be released when at roundtable sessions where everybody has a heart disposition that is geared towards bearing the burden of the organization and organizations or governments of cities, nations, territories, and structures towards the establishment of the will of God. It's only within the context of such roundtables with pure hearts and pure motives that these ideas can drop. These ideas mustn't necessarily come in the place of prayer. The heart's posture and an understanding of the need of the hour out of heaven, which has to do with the establishment of the will of God over territories, spheres, systems, and structures. That heart's posture is what is actually required to be able to receive these blueprints, rather than engaging ignorantly. All right. Now, the other thing is that there are covenants for structures. There are covenants for systems. The watchmen or those who are given, custodianship of authority over their spheres, who are the burden bearers, must seek to know the covenant requirements for the sustenance of that which the king is releasing out of heaven for the administration of the spheres, the systems, and structures. If these covenants are received and are heeded to, if these covenant strategies are received and heeded to, it does not matter the laws of the land, the strategies and the schemes of darkness towards destroying that which God is doing, they will not be able to stand, because inside of the covenant are defense mechanisms, artilleries, are celestial entities that are released to ensure that the will of God is established until the very end. And so this is important as we strive towards establishing a society that, at least to a great extent before the second coming of the King, can not just bet the will of God individually and in the churches, but over the 7 mountains of society, can take advantage of the resources of heaven in this hour to completely fill up the 7 mountains of society with the culture of heaven. It is important that we understand that God has gone ahead of us and is waiting for those who are going to be willing to come up here, so that these administrations and operations out of heaven for the establishment of godly leadership over nations, territories, systems, and structures can be established. And so until next week, I hope this broadcast has been a blessing to you. Please connect to us and connect with us, subscribe, and you can also connect to our website, as it's going to be displayed on the screen, so that you can get more updates in article forms, in audio forms, and video forms. And I know that we shall reign in this life and the next.
Thank you, viewers. We hope you enjoyed and you're impacted by these broadcasts. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Integrity Media, and you may please follow us on all our social media platforms on Twitter, Facebook, and on Instagram. For more information, please visit our website at www.integrityconcept.org or call 0817 501 5107 or 0803 921 7581. We roll in this life and in the next.